Coming up, why should Americans worry about over the Labor Day weekend? We'll talk about some of those things with our friend Ann Coulter next. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to take your phone calls and your emails. You know, I think that there are people who think that I speak in extreme tones at times, but nobody uses asterisks in her column the way my friend Ann Coulter does, and she writes some columns that make me laugh, even though this one's about death and destruction. And it still made me laugh because of the way you describe our nation's response. Why those illegal aliens, they're at great risk of being killed because of their own drunk driving. It is a little, there's a little cognitive dissonance going on there, isn't there, Ann?
It is hilarious. I mean, like I say, it's like Nazi concentration camp guards at greater risk of dying from Cyclone B if wind changes direction. That was the headline on the Huffington Post. I mean, the National Highway Safety something or other administration, whatever it is, they keep putting out report after report. The official bureaucracy's name has changed, which makes it especially confusing. But they keep putting out, it's about National Highway Safety. They keep putting out reports. And, you have to read carefully to get to the actual statistics. They're just glommed on with all the wonderful things about Hispanics. I mean, I think one of the reports spends longer explaining why they decided to use either Hispanic or Latino than they did actually giving us any statistics on who is committing the most, fatal drunk driving accidents. And it is pretty overwhelmingly Hispanics, Latinos, whatever word they settled on. Then there are all sorts of programs that they're putting out. Oh, it must be us. We must not be explaining properly how you're not supposed to get boozed up and then get behind the wheel of a car. So that was my little tip for the coming 3-day weekend, the Labor Day weekend. Watch out for drunk driving illegal aliens.
Well, and for example, I was just thinking that if somebody on the Republican side of the aisle had paraphrased in ordinary common citizen language what NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, actually wrote in its report and said, well, Hispanics teach their kids to booze it up because they think it's macho. Why, that Republican would probably be driven out of Washington, D.C., ridden out of town on a rail. But NHTSA actually wrote that. The authors found, this is very cerebral, the authors found that some Latino parents actively promote drinking among their sons as a sign of masculinity or machismo, and might be motivated more by a need to prove their manhood within the Latino culture. So, to oppose illegal aliens drinking, Ann, why, you are opposing Latinx culture, aren't you?
It's just crazy. I mean, is it only the families of people who end up getting killed? I mean, I have some of the stories in there, and they're really heartbreaking and sad. You don't hear about those. No, we just hear about kids separated from their parents at the border. Give me a break, liberals, and give me a break, media. If you cared about children, has any major media outlet covered any of the Angel mom families?
Nope.
No. Do they even know who Don Rosenberg is? That lovely woman, Mendoza, I forget her first name now. I follow her on Twitter. There's so many of them. But these were a few stories that I don't think, other than Don Rosenberg and his son, who was run over by an illegal alien, who took an illegal left turn. The illegal alien backed up over his son and then ran over him a third time. It comes out in court and they'll say, oh, well, I'm so sorry. I would never have done this. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing. But Americans are dying. And the point is, Americans can die from being hit by an American drunk driver. Of course they can. But these particular drunk drivers should not have been here in the first place. These are Americans, and a lot of them American kids who didn't have to die.
Well, and you've made the point in a number of your books, Ann, that we are importing to America culture. And you closed off by saying, diversity is strength. But, I take this seriously because the message you've always had is
ironic.
I know you are. But there are lots and lots of people who say, well, our diversity is our strength. And by embracing other cultures, well, if there are elements of another culture that say, for example, which is common in Latino culture, and I've heard it from Latinos themselves, 25-year-old guys with 14-year-old girlfriends. That's a part we don't need to import. Telling your kids, go out and drink a lot because that's the macho thing to do.
Macho.
That's a part of the culture that America doesn't need and I don't think doesn't want, does it?
Right, and I mean, why are immigrants coming to our wonderful, glistening culture? We have a wonderful culture. I think most ordinary Americans, and I don't mean that in a dismissive sense, but normal people are aware of that. And are perfectly willing to defend our culture. But, oh, my gosh, the corporations, the academics, the universities, the elites, I mentioned the corporation, they're all totally woke now. And the media, they absolutely aren't. They just want to push this idea that, oh, no, all cultures are equal. In fact, we can learn something from our mestizo brothers and sisters on how macho it is. No, they don't like the behavior. But just refuse to report on it. So you never know. All we hear about is the food, the tacos. Yes, I admit the food immigrants have brought is fantastic. It's made eating in America much better. We got enough of that now. Now we need to preserve the culture that immigrants immigrated to. They came here for a reason. We need to protect that culture. And this is really a pretty pristine example. Those quotes, by the way, about how it's part of Hispanic culture for fathers to tell their sons, come on, have a drink, this is what men do. Those were quotes from Hispanics. The authors had done a focus group, and those were direct quotes from the Latinos describing why they thought there was so much drunk driving among Hispanics. The other one that was it was sort of funny, in a sick sort of way, was that the study stated, just sort of blandly, again on page 89 of this report, that Mexicans in particular were likely to overestimate the number of drinks they could have before driving safely, putting it at about 8 or 10.
I mean, you got to complete
don't do that Labor Day weekend, kids.
And that it's peculiar to that culture because for most American moms and dads, if your kid said, "Well, Mom and Dad, if I go to a party this weekend, how many drinks can I drink before I get boozed to where I can't drive?" And they say, "Oh, 10 beers. If you hold it below there, you'll probably be okay." I think other parents would be appalled. They'd say, hold on a second, 10 beers in an hour or two? You're going to be incapacitated. And if you're still capable of driving, you have no business behind the wheel. And yet they're saying that this report is saying that's part of the culture, which I guess makes an excuse for doing it. Well, if it's part of the culture, then we have to accept it. I don't think we do. And I agree with you. The stunning stats, usually media loves stunning stats. But when you say, young Latinos are responsible for 1/3 of the DUI accidents in Houston. And you say, well, there are a lot of Latinos down there. They're 8% of the population, but they're responsible for 33% of the DUI accidents in Houston. There's something wrong with punching above your weight when it has to do with drinking and driving and getting hurt or killing people. You got to read this column by Ann Coulter. Ann, I'm up against the break, but her books, of course, In Trump We Trust, E Pluribus Awesome, and Resistance is Futile, How the Trump-Hating Left Has Lost Its Collective Mind. Although you're going to have to go home, Ann, and take a look at the DVR and watch Lawrence O'Donnell, the great Lawrence O'Donnell, apologizing because apparently the rigorous and diligent verification process used always by MSNBC failed to note that Larry O'Donnell was quoting stuff off some whack job website about the president and the loans he got from Russia. It's delicious to watch this guy actually have to eat some crow. Ann Coulter, a good friend of the show, and thank you very much. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.